So we're going to start Pirkei Avos. We're going to start, you can hear me? We're going to start Pirkei Avos. This is the Derech Yeshara Sheyover Lo Adam. Rebbe is going to teach us the proper way, the proper choice of behavior, the proper choice in Avodas Hashem. Ezu Derech Yeshara Sheyover Lo Adam. Now, I want to talk on this topic. Sometimes people are on a flight to Eretz Yisrael, and there are minyanim that have to be made. There's shachar, sometimes there's mincha u'ma'ariv, and there are often a lot of very frum people that are on the plane. Sometimes it's more than 2 or 3 minyanim, and they want to make a minyan. It's important, Tefillah B'tzibur is important, and they get together in the galley where all the service is done, and they feel that they're doing the right thing, and even though the stewardesses and the help are bothered by it, and they feel that's the right thing, because minyan l'chayra is an important halacha, and it has to be kept up even during flight. And on the other hand, there's a chilul Hashem, there's the fact that you're compromising possible safety issues. And I recall a psak from Rabbi Moshe Plutchok, I forgot which sefer I saw it in, but it was either in Shalmei Moyed or in one of the Sfarim, and Rabbi Moshe Plutchok said not to daven with the minyan, to sit in your seat, to put your feet together and daven properly. You're paying for a ticket, you're paying for service, you're paying for a flight back and forth, you're not paying for the ability to daven with a minyan. You didn't charter a private flight. And Rabbi Zalman felt, based on the concept of Derech Yeshara Sheyover Lo Adam, what's the proper way that a person should choose in serving Hashem, is it's got to be Tiferes Lo Isav, Tiferes Lo Min Adam. It's got to cause a certain type of splendor, a certain type of beauty to the one who's doing and to the one that's watching. Both have to appreciate what's happening. A minyan on a flight does not cause Tiferes Lo Min Adam. People see it and not very comfortable with it. Yes, the person, it's not Tiferes Lo Isav, it's Tiferes Lo Min Adam. People doing it have accomplished, they've gotten their minyan. Now, an argument could be made that if you're flying an El Al flight and most of the people are Jewish and the flight crew understands that this is what happens, could be it's something that they've learned to accommodate, it's part of the needs. I definitely understand that that's something that could be shifted if that would be the case. But in a simple, I would say, straightforward understanding, the Derech Yeshara has to accomplish both. It has to be Tiferes Lo Min Adam, the doer, and Tiferes Lo Isa, the people watching. The Rav on this Mishnah explains that this is a reference to the Rambam's Derech HaMemutza, the Rambam's golden rule. The Rambam talks about different traits and different characteristics that human beings have. If a person is very cheap, that's a wonderful thing for him. He'll always hoard his money. He'll make sure that he always has enough. He'll never be caught without what he needs. That's Tiferes Lo Min Adam, but it's not Tiferes Lo Isa. It's not going to be a nice thing to people watching him. People that are expecting a birthday gift, people that want charity, people that want assistance, children that might want help from him. That's b'chalal not a nice thing. It affords him the comfort that he needs, that his money will always be by his side and he'll be able to have what he needs for expenses. But it's not something that causes general splendor to people watching. On the other hand, the person who gives away everything he has and dies penniless and leaves his children with nothing, that's not Tiferes Lo Min Adam either. That's also a problem. He doesn't have anything. He's always needy. He's always looking for how he's going to get his next situation covered and taken care of. So the Rambam explains that's the golden rule. It's the Derech HaMemutza. A person has to find the middle ground, something that affords beauty to the people looking and something that affords him stability. And this would be the halacha and the approach in every other midas. A little bit of it might be acceptable, too much might not be acceptable. It's the Derech HaMemutza. Psukim in Mishlei echo the same point. It says, Dvash motzasa achol dayeka. If you find honey, eat just enough. Pentis be'enu v'hakei oisei. We don't want you to engorge yourself and then spit it out. You'll get very sick of it. Anytime a person has a food that they like very much and they overeat, after a while they become extremely engorged by it, and it's not a very good effect. Koheles, it says, Al titzadik arbe, val techkam yoyse lama tishtoimim. And then Al tirsha harbe, it says, don't be too evil. Val tisocha lama tamas b'leitecha. Why should you die before your time? Now, I want to just give an example I was reading, and this morning I mentioned it in my halacha shir, which takes place every morning at 9 o'clock for those interested on Zoom. Now, we talked about an architect, actually an engineer. He wasn't the architect, he was the engineer of a famous building. It's an iconic building on 53rd and Lexington. It's the Citigroup building. It's always known by that name. It's been known by that name as the Citigroup building. It was built by somebody named Stubbins, a group named Stubbins, who went on to build tremendous amounts of building all over the world. And the engineer was a person named William LeMessurier. Now, the interesting thing about that building was when they built it, they originally were going to build 4 posts in the corner of each of the sides of the building, the corners of the building, and that would support the building. It was a 60-story building. And that would be a very standard, sturdy construction. But there was a landmark church, the St. Peter's Church, evangelical church, that didn't want to give up their spot. They liked their spot, they liked their building. They came to some agreement with the Citicorp group that the building was going to be built around their existing structure. So instead of the supporting beams being placed in the corner, they were going to be placed in the middle of each of the sides of the building, and it would be cantilevered over the church. It was a unique construction, and it was known as sort of like a pine tree construction, where the beams that supported would be running crisscross upside down, like an upside down pine tree. The engineer, who calculated normal winds for New York, which would be up to 140 miles per hour, those are the high winds, possibility of a hurricane. He calculated it together with all the furniture, and he felt he had a very strong structure. He bolted all the steel instead of welding the steel. This was built in 1974. He was very happy with his construction. It won a tremendous amount of acclaim and great awards. In 1977 or 78, a Princeton engineering student, her name was Hartley, I think Phyllis Hartley, was studying the building, and she was writing it up as a project, and she kept rethinking the structure of the building, and she comprehended strongly if the wind would come directly, the building could sustain those wind forces. But if the wind would come in an angular fashion and it would hit from 2 sides of the building, her calculations told her that bolted steel beams would not support it. And she didn't understand how LeMessurier came to his conclusion. And she needed some help to write her project, so she contacted him. She called him, she sent letters, and when LeMessurier got her information, he looked at it and he did a double take. He said, oh my, this woman is right. And the first thing he did was call his lawyers. He then called the head of the welders union. He called the head of Citicorp. He called the mayor, who I think was A. Beam at the time. He called about 6 or 7 people, specific key people that he would need to help him do the project that he wanted to do. He didn't want anybody to know about this. He didn't want to create panic. He didn't want to create any pandemonium. He wanted to be able to do the repair in the dead of night. And he hired every welder that was known to be a welder in the 100-mile radius. And they worked from nightfall to daybreak for the next 3 months, welding the bolted area. They took apart the front facade of the building, did the welding, and then covered it. No one knew about this. People saw for 3 months extensive work on the building. They were just told that it's design work, it's nothing important. No one knew about this till 20 years later. LeMessurier died in, I think, 2007 or 2012. But this was finally exposed by a speech that he gave in the late 90s. Now, there was a tremendous amount of criticism to LeMessurier. On the other hand, there were a lot of people that defended him. A lot of people were extremely impressed by the fact that he owned up to his mistake right away, and he did it in a manner that was responsible. He covered all the bases. He did it in a manner that wouldn't cause panic and be disruptive. He understood that if he would call it like a clarion call, all the 200,000 people that could possibly be affected by a collapse would stop working. It could create a financial catastrophe. He took all the factors into consideration, and this was the approach he took. When you look at it from hindsight quarterbacks could discuss whether he did right, whether he didn't do right. One thing is clear, that when anybody evaluates William LeMessurier, they say it was a person that took every fact into consideration, minus the original mistake that he made. And in my mind, when I look at the concept of a derech yeshara sheyavar lo adam, something that's difficult. It's a path that's not always easy. You don't always get fans, and you don't always get acclaim. You have to make sometimes very difficult choices, but you have to factor in everything. And then you take the derech hamemutza, which in the case of LeMessurier, sort of quelled fears, but took care of the problem. It was 3 months that people were possibly subjected to some type of danger. We would never know. At the end, it looked like it played out very well for him. Chazal tell us that Shaul HaMelech, this is a Gemara in Yuma, when he went to battle, so he was told to annihilate Amalek. Now we today, in a civilized fashion, sometimes have difficulty in understanding what the concept of genocide is, why the annihilation of the whole nation. Sometimes it's important for us to see it as, how would we feel right after Holocaust, Nazi Germany, if we were told we had the capacity to put an atom bomb in that country and it would never bother anyone again, recognizing that it's been responsible for thousands or maybe 1,000 years of persecution. A lot of pogroms, a lot of Jewish evictions, a lot of crusades that ended up in wiping out major communities, worms, sapiers, a lot of different things that they provided for the world. It might not be that complicated if we see it in that light. But in any event, Shaul was struggling with that. When he was told, Lech behecharamta es Amalek, so his right response was, Hashem said, Noshim, Anoshim, Taf, Shlo, everything. He says, Im Anoshim chatu, Behema lama chatu. What did the animals do? He said, and even if Anoshim chatu, what did the children do? What did the Ketanim do? What did the Noshim do? And Yotz Basko min hashamayim, a Basko came out from heaven, and he was told, Al titzdak harbe. That's the pasuk that Al titzadik harbe. That's the pasuk we saw in Kayelis. Al titzadik harbe, Val techkam yoyse, lama tishtaimim. Don't be so righteous. Don't be more righteous than God. Don't have calculations that are larger than the Rebbeinu Shlalom's. He told you, engage in a genocidal war, as hard as it is. This is for the protection and the stability of Klal Yisrael. Don't supersede his understanding of mercy and his depth of compassion. That's not your place. And then, a short while later, after he was ensconced and he already sinned and he lost his melucha and he was chasing David, this is a few years later, so he finds that David found and sought refuge in Noiv, the city of Kohanim, and he tells Doeg Adoimi, he tells his general, he tells his aide-de-camp, Seif Pagabahem, go wipe them all out. And that was a very strange thing for someone so merciful. He was so concerned with David and the possible rebellion that he wiped out a whole city of innocent Kohanim. And the Basko came out right then and there, Al Tirsha Harbe. When there's no understanding of a derech yeshara, there is no balance. Sometimes you're going to be overly righteous. Sometimes you're going to be overly evil. There has to be a balance. A derech yeshara sheyavar le'adam is balance. It's the middle road. It's not overly righteous and it's not overly evil. The Germans in Nazi Germany were legendary at their animal rights activity. They were very concerned. They were extremely concerned with humane societies and with animal rights. But when it came time to slaughtering the Jews, it was easy for them to just call them all parasites. Often it's the people that slaughter humans, but they hug and kiss calves. So the concept over here is a derech yeshara sheyavar le'adam is a derech hamemutza. In this vein of Alti Tzadik Harbe, I recall reading the story of Marcus Luttrell. This was a story he wrote in a book called The Lone Soldier. And to some extent, I think that he falls under this bikoris, under this criticism. He was sent by a division leader in the army of Afghanistan to find some local warlord. They were tracking him for days. They were up on a mountain ridge, him and three of his soldiers. Then they had sniper sights, and they had barometer testers and everything. They were set up. It was something that they wanted to get. They've been tracking it for a while. And all of a sudden, as they're ready to zero in on the person they're looking for, 3 goat herds, people that were walking with goats, appear on the mountain ridge, and they see them. They immediately arrest them. They tie their hands and feet with zip ties. They tie the goats up. They have a tremendous amount of work there, and then they start thinking, what should they do? Should they kill them? After all, these people did nothing wrong. They're simple shepherds. They just meandered into a dangerous spot. The army is not supposed to be killing people. On the other hand, if they let them go, they'll alert the town, and the person they're looking for, not only will he now be alerted, but who knows what kind of avalanche of fury they could unleash on themselves. He runs around the country saying the story, and the mistake that he made, the horrible mistake that he made, he superseded his soldiers who told him, please, let's kill them. Please, these people are only going to work for their people. They're going to go back. They're going to bring a whole avalanche of who knows what kind of RPGs and mortars, and it's going to be terrible for us. But he was the commander, and he said, no, the army's not supposed to kill people. I think this is a case of al titzdak harbe. I think philosophers could argue from today till eternity whether he did right, whether he did wrong. But the facts were very clearly proven. He let them go. They went down into the village. They escaped as quick as lightning. They couldn't even see them the second they let them go. Within 5 minutes or 10 minutes, they were back. The 3 soldiers that were under Marcus Luttrell were killed. He himself was captured. Eventually, he was let free in an exchange, or he escaped. I'm not sure what exactly happened. He goes on to tell the story. But here's a concept. If you're supposed to go in and people come into your purview, it's not so simple. I'm not saying that what he did was wrong. I'm not saying what he did was right. But the emphasis is that this is a challenge. This is a case where the Derech Yeshara might have been sometimes cruel. The Derech Yeshara might have not necessarily been this merciful Derech, which would have allowed these people to run off. The Derech Yeshara might have had with it some cruelty. It's not clear to me. Now, and the interesting thing is that once you act excessively merciful in places that you're not supposed to, you're going to end up acting excessively cruel in places that you're not supposed to. Losing balance is a terrible thing, and it's often very hard to regain it. Losing balance, losing cheshbon. As I'm talking, I'm just thinking there's a concept in the Mishnah we'll learn a little later. Al tarbe la'aser u'mothers. In Maisa, when it comes to Maisa Ksofim, when it comes to giving tithe, a person is supposed to be meticulous about how he tithes. A person is supposed to make sure, and I'm guilty of this, and I'm sure many of the people I'm talking to are also guilty of this, but you're supposed to be meticulous and have it written in a book how much you gave. You're supposed to even write the small charities and small donations that you give, whether you're giving them online or small checks or even pushka money, because you're supposed to have an accurate balance of a fifth of what of a tenth of Maisa, a tenth of what you're giving. Why? Because if you're not careful, today you're ahead of the curve and you're giving Maisa, and Maisa owes you. But tomorrow, as you're catching up, it'll happen many times that you owe Maisa and you'll never know. If you do not keep a cheshbon, the loss of balance is a hard thing to regain. Once you lose balance, it's a very hard thing to regain. They say about a story they say about a store that existed in Kelm. Kelm was a nice Jewish community, a pre-war community. It pretty much ran under the auspices of the Alter of Kelm, Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel. He was a brilliant man and a great visionary. He was responsible for most of the Musar yeshivas. Not clear. He was responsible for most of the Musar yeshivas. So there was a store in Kelm, and the owner of the store, he didn't like to be in the shop. He enjoyed learning in the yeshiva like everybody else. So he came to the altar and he said, listen, I sell a bunch of different grocery and dry good items, not so many. He says, I could put a little pushka in front of each of the items and I could instruct people, pay this amount for this amount for this. And Kelm, it's a wonderful place. Everybody here is, everybody's malachim. Why do I have to sit in the store and make change? And let me just put it like that, open honor policy, let everybody come in and pay. And the Alter was very impressed. He says, we have such a good village, we have such a good town. He says, amazing. He says, do it. That could be a very big schus. After a week, he called the grocer and he says, "Nu, how are collections?" He says, everything to the penny, exact to the penny. I find in the pushka, I collect it once every night, and everything to the penny exactly. This was the first 24-hour store. You didn't have to close at night. A week later, the Alter asks him again, "Nu, how is it?" He says, "Rebbe, it's not quite to the penny. I'm finding extra. There are people that are dumping a little extra in the pushka." The Alter says, "No, then you can't come to yeshiva. Close this system down. Go back and stand behind the counter." He says, "Why?" He says, "It's extra." He says, "Today it's extra, tomorrow it's less." Without a system, it's loss of balance, and once you lose balance, you can't regain it. Systems are important. The derech hamemutza is important. Balance is very important. It's very critical. Rebbe says, "Eizu derech yishor sheyover le'adam, kol shi tiferes le'min adam v'tiferes lo'isel." It's balance. It's about balance. Now, there's an interesting part that this parak sort of wends its way into, and that's a series of mishnahs a drop later. Those are the mishnahs of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was one of our biggest people. He's the Mekabel of the Torah that received it from both the houses of Hillel and Shammai. He got the softness of Hillel and the pedantic, methodical exactitude of Shammai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the Moira of Klal Yisrael, and he had 5 remarkable Talmidim. And it says Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he used to calculate, he used to enumerate the shvach, what we would call the speciality of his Talmidim. It's an interesting thing. A Rebbe loves all his Talmidim, a father loves all his children, but something above love, something more than love, is to love each child uniquely, to understand the unique strength of every child, to understand the unique capacity of every Talmud. There's something very beautiful in that. That creates a deeper and more profound relationship. When somebody compliments you and says something specific, a specific compliment is far more valid and far more validating than a compliment that's general. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai worked very hard on noticing the specific talents and the beauty of each and every individual Talmud. And Rebbe Lezer ben Hyrcanus, who was his oldest Talmud, he said, he's a bur sud she'eina ma'abed. His mind is like a sieve. It doesn't lose a thing. It absorbs everything, and nothing gets lost. Meaning, his appreciation for information is tremendous. Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, he was so exhilarated when talking about Rabbi Yeshua ben Chananya, he said, "Ashrei yoladate," lucky is his mother. Maybe he was a goyin in Kibbud Avayim. I don't think that's what it means. I think he was overwhelmed by exhilaration when describing that student. He couldn't even stop. He said, "Ashrei yoladate." Yosi HaKohen, he said, he's a chassid. He's very pious. Shimon ben Nesana was a Yirei Chet. Elazar ben Aroch. Now this is his principal student. This student is his favorite student, and we're going to see it in the next 2 mishnahs. He's a Mayan HaMisgaber. He's a Mayan HaMisgaber, and then the Mishnah goes on to say that if all Chachmei Yisrael were on one scale, on the side of a scale, and Rebbe Elazar ben Aroch was on the other side, he would be Machriya as Kulam. He would be able to weigh everybody down with his qualities and with his abilities. Now, what was Rebbe Elazar ben Aroch's uniqueness? He was a Mayan HaMisgaber. There's a very important difference. You have to understand the difference between empathy and between sympathy. Empathy, I explained this. Some people sometimes don't like this explanation, but empathy is if you see somebody get his hand jammed in a door, and you wince because looking at that painful situation causes you pain. It fires certain neurons in your mind that react a certain way. That's empathy. It doesn't mean that you're going to be moved to doing anything. It doesn't mean that you're going to act sympathetically. Sympathy is an action. Empathy is a feeling. Many people have empathetic feelings but don't have a sympathetic approach to things. I recall reading about a woman who lived near one of the near one of the death camps in Nazi Germany. And she heard the abuse, and she heard the horror, and she heard the different things that they were doing to the captives and to the soldiers, from killing to torturing. And she wrote a letter to the Commandant. She says, "Dear Commandant, I beg of you, please move your operation somewhere else. I can't take the horror of what I'm listening to. It affects me terribly. I'm an old lady. I can't handle it. Please move it somewhere else." That's empathy. Empathy in a German form. That's a woman who just didn't want to see it. It's like watching a movie where many people get punched in the face and bleed all over the place. You just don't want to watch it. You don't want to do something to stop it. That's empathy. Sympathy is empathy plus the resolution to do something. Sympathy is the desire. My father was very sympathetic. My father, Areni Kaparas Mushkavai, had empathy and had sympathy. He would go the longest distance and through the hardest hoops in order to do something to prevent harsh and difficult situations. Now, sympathy and empathy require a person that could transcend himself. Just like a cancer doctor doesn't have to have cancer in order to be empathetic and sympathetic. And an obstetrician doesn't have to be a woman. He never had to have had a baby in order to understand the pain and the burden that it is for a woman to go through childbirth. But if a person has a little bit of this concept of a mayan hamizgaber, if a person can comprehend the idea of transcending themselves, moving past their frame of reference, recognizing that there's a world out there and trying to use your imagination. The imagination is guilty of so many things, but it's a benefit in so many ways. It's guilty of robbing our ability to concentrate. It's guilty of robbing our ability to work diligently. But it's also a tremendous gift. It gives the person the ability to be a mayan hamizgaber. If a person could just use his imagination to be the mayan hamizgaber, he could have a little bit of me'en, a dogma, a little bit of what Rebbe Lezer ben Aroch had. And that's what Rav Yechon ben Zakkai was saying. My Rebbe Lezer ben Aroch, you know what he is? He's a mayan hamizgaber. He could transcend, he could transpose himself, put himself into your situation, say the right thing, do the right thing, something the rest of my Talmidim cannot do. And there is, interestingly, just to drive this point home, in Avos de Rav Nosson, there's a very interesting, Avos de Rav Nosson is an expansion on classic Avos, and Avos de Rav Nosson in Pirkei Avos, it says like this, that when Rav Yechanan ben Zakkai lost his son, Rav Yechanan ben Zakkai had a son, he treasured him very much, and he lost him, and it was very devastating to him. So it says, Nichnisu Talmidav Lenachamai. His Talmidim came in to be Menachemim. Now I'm not going to explain the whole medrash over here, because something over here is very amusing, and it doesn't make so much sense. I'll leave that up to any of you if you want to say a pshat. But it says, Nichnas Rabbi Lezer, Nichnisu Talmidim Lenachamai. The Talmidim came in to be Menachemim. And it says that Rebbe Lezer, this is Rebbe Lezer ben Hurkanus, this is the one that had every, and he said to him, listen, Rebbe, he says, Rebbe, Adam Arishain had two sons, one killed the other, he lost his son. Adam knew how to get up, dust himself off, and continue walking. Rebbe, you should also understand, you lost a son, it's a tragedy, but get up and keep walking. And Rabbi Yechanan looked at him, he says, what are you doing? He says, I'm suffering myself. All you did was you reminded me the pain of Adam Arishan. I'm not sure what he was saying exactly, but I think he was saying to him, you're not at all comprehending the type of words I need to hear. You're not at all on the level of giving me nechama. You haven't transcended your frame of reference. Rabbi Yeshua comes in. That's the next Talmud, and he says, could I say something to you? And Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Yechanan nods his head. He says, go ahead. And he says, listen, Eiv, he had seven sons and 3 daughters, and they were all killed in one day. V'kibel Eiv Tanchumin. Even Eiv, he said, Hashem lokach, Hashem nasan, Hashem lokach, Yishem Hashem mevorach. Eiv was able to go on further. He was able to dust himself off, despite the fact that he saw. And Rabbi Yechanan says, Adsha, what are you doing to me? He says, I'm in pain. Now you're lumping on and lobbing Eiv's pain on me. The next Talmud comes in and he says, Aaron had 2 sons and he lost them in one day. These were his future. This was the crown of his everything. And Rabbi Yechanan says, what are you doing to me? I'm suffering with my son, and now you're reminding me about Aaron. And the next Talmud came in and said, David HaMelech had a child. He wanted that child very badly. He lost the child, but he got up, he took off his sackcloth and was able to move on further. Rabbi Yochanan says, what are you doing to me? I'm suffering terribly with the loss of my son. Now you go and you give me the loss of... It's not fair, it's not fair. Finally, he sees Rabbi Eliezer ben Aruch. He sees him walking in. So he tells his shamus, Rabbi Yochanan tells his shamus, listen, get me my brush and my bath towel, because I know this guy, this student over here, he's going to get it done. He's an Adam Gadol ve'eini yochel lamed b'fanav. He's a great man, and I'm not going to be able to resist his words. As much as I want to hang on to my sadness, and as much as I want to mourn my son, but he's an Adam Gadol ve'eini yochel lamed b'fanav. Right? So it says, Nichnas ve'yoshav lefanav. He sat in front of him. And it's interesting. He didn't ask him if he could say anything. He says, Emshal the Rabbi Moshe. Let me give you a mashal. He says a person was friendly with the king, and the king gave him something to watch. Mashal le'adam shehifkid etzlei hamelach bikodei. So he says, and every day the guy was so worried, and he was so aggravated, and he said, I can't, this is a burden to watch the king's item. Who knows if I'm ever going to, my head is going to be lost if something happens to this item. I'm dying to get rid of it. And then one day the king came and says, could I have my item back? And the man was Sameach Simcha Gedola. He was so happy. He was very happy. He says, finally, he did his shmirah, everything was good. The king took the item back, and he's party. He says, so too you had a son. You taught him Torah, you taught him Mikra, you taught him Nevi'im, Ksuvim, Halachas, Haggadis, Benifta min ha'olam. Beloy chet. You did a perfect mission. You gave the Rebbeinu Shalom back his keli exactly the way he gave him to you. There were no dents, there were no finger marks, everything was perfect. Rabbi Yochanan got up and he kissed him. He says, you know how to be Menachem. He says, you know how to be Menachem kederach shebnei Adam Menachemim. You know exactly what to say. This is the concept of a Mayan HaMisgaber. An empathetic, sympathetic individual that knows how to change the narrative. Until now, everybody was looking how to do a comparison. To say, yes, it's an Aveda, it's a terrible tragedy, but let's figure out there were other people that had these tragedies, and they were able to dust off and continue walking. Rabbi Eliezer ben Aruch, he's a narrative changer. He's a transcender of everybody's emotions, his own. He's a transcender of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He tries to fix the situation in a way nobody can. It's not an Aveda, he says. Your whole premise is wrong. The premise is absurd. What you had over here was a gift, and you had to give your gift up. And it made sense to Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. And that he was able to get up. He knew he was going to get up, but he was able to get up and walk to the bathhouse. That's a concept. To be able to change the narrative, those are the best negotiators. Those are the people that are the most effective in conversation. You're saying that these are the only solutions. Okay, let's think. There's another possibility, a solution that you didn't think of. Why should I be completely hemmed in by the 4 solutions you brought to the table? Let's talk, there's another solution. This was the godless of Rabbi Eliezer ben Aruch. Rabbi Eliezer ben Aruch was a narrative changer. He understood to transcend. But here's something interesting. Also, when Rabbi Yochanan asked his Talmidim, and this is the same as the beginning of the Perek. The Perek started by Rebbe looking for Ezui Derech Yeshara, Shiyavar Le'ya Adam. What's the right way? What's the right way? What's the Derech Yeshara, Shiyavar Le'ya Adam? And Rebbe said, Kol Shi Tiferes Lo Yiseh V'Tiferes Lo Min Adam. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai also asked his Talmidim. He said, go out and seek Ezuhi Derech Toiva Sheyidbak Ba Adam. What's a nice, beautiful way that a person should cling to? This is almost as similar as the question that we talked about before. Ezuhi Derech Yeshara Sheyidbak Ba Adam. So Rabbi Eliezer said an ayin toiv, Rabbi Yeshua said a chaver toiv. It means a good eye, seeing good in people. The next one said good friends, having people that you could talk and bounce things off. The next one said good neighborhood. Rav Shimon said, no, you have to be somebody that sees the future. You have to always be guarded. And Rabbi Elazar says, Lev Toiv. He says, a good heart. Be open to everybody, to everything. This is very consistent with the Mayan HaMisgaber. And what should you stay away from? They all had... And Rav Yochanan ben Zakkai says, I like what Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch says. Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch, Roy ani is devrechem b'soich devarav. I see shebechlal devarav devrechem. Whatever you're saying about the good neighborhood, and whatever you're saying about good friends, and whatever you're saying about a good heart, and whatever you're saying about a royas anoilim, he's encompassing it all in his leiv toiv. An open heart, open to everybody, that's far more beneficial, and it's far more encompassing than anything you said. And when he talked about staying away, what should you stay away from? And they all said what they said, and he said stay away from the lev ra. Again, Rav Yochanan said everything he says seems to be the winning solution. Now, let's talk about what happened to Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch after Rabbi Yochanan died. It would seem that he's the heir apparent. It would seem that out of all his Talmidim, Rabbi Yochanan favored his attitude, meaning that he was a Mayan HaMisgaber. Rabbi Yochanan favored his derech and avodas Hashem, lev toiv, which was open beyond openness. Rabbi Yochanan said he favored his ways in Musar, stay away from a lev ra. Technically, Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch is the heir apparent. It doesn't say that. It says in two places, one in Avos to Reb Nosson and the other in Shabbos Daf Kuf Mem Zayin, that when they finally left Rav Yochanan after his death, so the Talmidim went to places that had yeshivas. And they asked Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch, and they said, please join us. He said, no, I want to go to Yumsis. Now, we don't know where Yumsis is, but it's somewhere, maybe in the Galil, I don't know where it is. But he went to Yumsis. Yumsis was a very hedonistic place. Maybe he even went there because he had a leiv toiv. He was a Mayan HaMisgaber, and he might be the perfect person to be Makar of everybody in Yumsis. But that's not what happened. What happened was that he fell afoul of learning, and he became one of the people of Yumsis. He drank the wine that they had, which was Chamra de Parguyisa. He drank their waters, and just like their waters hurt many people beforehand, it also hurt Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch. Okay? And he lost his Talmud. Iyake Talmudei. And he wasn't, not only, according to the Pshat of the Gemara, okay, obviously others come with the Pshat, and they make it a little less harsh, but it says that when Talmidim asked him to read from the Torah, and it said, Achodesh hazeh lochem, he read Hacheresh Haya Libam. He couldn't read. Hachodesh hazeh lochem, he read Hacheresh Haya Libam. Imagine a Balkaira like that. Instead of Hachodesh hazeh lochem, he read Hacheresh Haya Libam. It says, and then what happened was that Boy Rabbanan Rachme Aleh v'Hoder Talmudei. The Rabbanan asked for mercy, and eventually he got back his Torah. Eventually he was able to get back into the discussion. He was able to get, and that's what Rav Noiroi said. Have a goyle l'makom Torah. Rav Noiroi is famous for the statement of have a goyle l'makom Torah. Go, you follow where Torah is. V'al toy mashi tovei acharecha. Don't think that it's going to follow you, which is what he thought would happen. Or shechaverecha yikaimu biyadecha, or that your friends are going to eventually help you with it. Ve'al tishayin. Chazal tell us that Rav Nehoiroi was possibly Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch, who after going to the wrong spot and having this terrible fall and coming back, learned this lesson and taught this lesson. Novos, the teretz is that the way the parak started is the way the parak is continuing. Even though Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai loved Rabbi Elazar ben Aruch's talents, and he loved his approach to everything, but it was not the derech hamemutza. It was an extreme. It was an extreme in open-mindedness. It was extreme in emotionality. It was an extreme. And that extreme ended up costing him. The derech hamemutza means, yes, you have to be very loving. Yes, you have to be very tolerant. Yes, you have to have everything good in everybody and see it all. But you can't be a shaita. You also have to know what's wrong. You also have to stay away from what's wrong. You also have to make sure that what's right and what's wrong are fused together in a way that you walk down the path of the derech hamemutzas. Thank you so much for listening. I hope to see you again, Mirz Hashem, Thursday. Same time, same place. Rabbi Akiva will send out the information. And good night.